be seated. Alyssa, that was a very good children's sermon for a very hard text. The gospel of the Lord, grace, peace, and mercy are yours from the triune God. Amen. When I first moved to Colorado, Tamara, my wife, and I went camping with some friends. Car camping. Do people car camp here? Are people car campers? I wasn't, but I am now. Car camping is awesome. I know that now, but I was unfamiliar with the practice. It is not how we grew up. And it's certainly not how I had been camping prior to this trip. We were real campers. We were backpackers. We were serious. What a bunch of snobs, you know. So when we pulled up to the dispersed camping site with our friends, I immediately went into campcraft mode and started gathering enough firewood for the whole night and setting up a cooking station and putting up tents and delegating like I was in the Canadian backwoods or something. Meanwhile, my buddies, they were pulling out like the metal camping chairs and Coleman stoves, and we're boiling tea, like water for tea, and we're sticking their feet in the water and hanging up hammocks and stuff. What a bunch of fools. What a bunch of fools. That night, though, our differences in style hit its peak. I had been working on dinner for like 3 hours to get the perfect coals and chop up the vegetables just so and layered everything into my Dutch oven and have rice and bean casseroles, only for it to come up both raw and burnt. I swear I can camp. But I looked over and I just felt absolutely defeated because there were my friends were having a great time laughing at me, sticking Totino's pizza rolls on metal sticks and just roasting them in the fire, just straight out of the bag, having a ball. And now who was the fool? Well, I was busy making absurd and unnecessary obstacles for myself based on my perceived understanding of what camping should look like. They were actually doing what they came out there to do. They were laughing and relaxing and sitting around in each other's company, recharging in nature. We were car camping, friends. Everyone laughed at me, of course. I think they just thought it was what I wanted to do, but I didn't know that another way was actually possible. Instead of recharging and spending time with my friends, I missed the point and found myself disappointed and frustrated and even more wound up than I was when I got there. This parable for today is found in the middle of what we call the eschatological discourse. It's this really long narrative spanning 2 whole chapters, chapter 24 and 25 of Matthew. Eschatological is a fancy theology word that means the end times, or they're about the second coming of Christ. Other popular stories found in this very long teaching from Jesus include Jesus warning about false prophets, Israel not being fooled, nations rising up against nations, being ready, lots about being ready and prepared, not knowing the time of his coming and going, the parable of the talents, the parable of the fig tree, and the judgment of the nations where the goats are separated from the sheep, where it becomes evident who clothed, fed, visited, imprisoned the least of these, and who did not. And what that means for our relationship with God, who is apparently all those people who needed to be fed, given water, and visited in prison. That is the context that we find our text today. Throughout this discourse with Jesus, Jesus seems to be warning people that no one is going to have the answers. Jesus seems to be talking about how there's not as much certainty as we like to think there might be, that we won't know the time of his coming and going, but to keep following his commandments in the meantime, to keep being a good disciple, keep serving the lowly, the people who the Sermon on the Mount deserved blessings, to clothe, feed, and provide for the people who need it, and to advocate for the helpless, to keep being a lamp, a light in the world, even when it's hard. That is a way of our faith. We practice, we serve, and we ready ourselves, even when we don't have all of the answers, even when we are not 100% sure if we're doing it right. We do our best to love God and love our neighbor and trust that God will make up the difference in the end. But I think sometimes we find ourselves in a perfection-driven society where we need, or we tell ourselves, we need to be 100% prepared, completely perfect on our own accord, and totally correct in everything. We forget that we don't actually need to have all the answers to live fulfilling lives with love, and that we can be served and love each other and God, even if we sometimes are uncertain about our own beliefs. And even though we are not going to be perfect, we forget that grace abounds. Instead, like the foolish bridesmaids in the story, we freak out. We spin ourselves out of control to try to gain some semblance of power, and we miss out on God's goodness that's all around us anyway. This week I had a few conversations with some folks around here around readiness and having the right answers. And it kind of made me wonder about this parable a little bit. Specifically, I wondered what makes the bridesmaids foolish. Read one way, we can look at this text and say, well, they were not ready. They needed oil and they didn't have it. They were not prepared. They did not have all the right answers. They did not have everything that they needed. They did it wrong. But read another way, maybe what makes them foolish is that they thought they needed the oil at all. There are other bridesmaids with oil for their lamp. Maybe they were foolish for not just walking in under their light. Why do they all need lanterns anyway? Maybe they were foolish for not just trusting that they already had what they needed. Maybe they were foolish for not trusting in the goodness of the bridegroom. I wonder if they just needed to remember why they were there, that it was okay to be in the dark for a little while. I wonder if worrying about having all the right answers, having all the right stuff, made them miss the point. Maybe they were foolish because they thought they needed to look and be just like everybody else. Almost like they had an image in their head about what this was supposed to look like, and if they did not have what would let them look like that, it was all pointless anyway, and they might as well just give up. Maybe how they were was good enough. And what makes them foolish, what causes them to miss out on the wedding feast, isn't the lack of oil, but the lack of trust in God's goodness or the bridegroom's goodness. Maybe they don't need all the right stuff after all. Maybe what they need is to take a beat and admit that some things are just beyond their control, to try their best and to celebrate with their community. Instead of joy and celebration, they miss the point and drive headlong into a quest for oil rather than watching and waiting for the bridegroom's party. We find ourselves on the doorsteps of Advent, a time where we ready ourselves for the coming of Jesus into our world on Christmas morning and every other morning. But I wonder if we in the Western world confuse what it means to be ready. What does it mean to be ready? Is it to have the right answers? Is it to be so secure in our own stability that we are untouchable and immovable? Does our faith need to be perfect? Do we need to have all the right answers? Or is waiting in the darkness with one another enough? is watching the horizon for the coming light, even when things seem hopeless, even if we do not have the right gear sufficient? I don't know. But I think this parable does warn us not to be so foolish to believe that we can have all the right answers, all the right gear, that we can be perfect, that we can have all the right stuff to be correct. Because we never will have all the right stuff. And we will never be perfect. We will never have everything down pat. And when we catch ourselves scrambling around trying to get everything just so and trying to keep up with our neighbors who seem to have their stuff all together just because they have something we don't have, or we think it's how we must be, sometimes we forget to look for God, who shows up in the things that we don't have, who shows up in our own mess. We forget to look for what's important. Instead, our frenzy to be perfect leaves us unprepared for the goodness of a wedding feast that simply asks us to be present. Amen.